Welcome to the Real Construction Owners Podcast, where we interview real construction owners and individuals who will help you go from being a stressed out operator to a thriving owner so you can crush it and live your best life ever. Today, we have somebody very special, a friend of mine in GoBundance named David Vernich, the author of Middle Class to Millionaire. And we're going to be discussing principles about wealth building. We're going to be discussing how to acquire assets. And if you're in the shoes of a contractor and you want to learn how to be able to retire wealthy early, then pay close attention. What's up, David? How you doing today, bud?
I'm doing great, Justin. How about yourself?
I am so blessed and I am so highly favored. Thanks for asking.
Yes, sir.
Man, so what's good? Tell us a little bit about your background. By the way, my audience is like, okay, why should I listen to this guy? He's not a contractor. So this is your chance to brag a little bit, give us some accolades, and tell us, your story.
Well, I think all contractors, by and large, are going to need a good banker on their corner, unless they're just independently wealthy and have all the cash they need. So I would think the majority of your audience probably does have to deal with, people like myself. I'm a commercial lender, have been so for over 3 decades, and kind of switching gears with the people that we're talking to, that was one of the things where I envied those people that had their own business, were self-employed, could kind of get up and do what they wanted to do, and especially if they were involved in real estate, since that's banks' favorite form of collateral. So we tend to like to lend to people that are your audience. So that's the good news. But the flip side of that coin is kind of like the shoe. What do they call those people that make the shoes? The cobblers' children have no shoes because they're too busy building other people's shoes or don't have it for their own kids. Same thing for builders. Is I see a lot of builders are so busy, working and doing stuff and building houses for other people that forget to look and say, what do I need for my own family to generate passive income that I can live on when I don't want to work anymore, when I do want to retire? Because we all will reach that point in life where we want to kind of enjoy life like you are now in Costa Rica. So we all want to have that freedom of time to do what we want, when we want, where we want, with whom we want. But if you're not trying to actively build your passive income, that day may never come.
Beautifully said. And commercial lending for over 3 decades, that alone should make somebody want to pay close attention, because, the power of leverage and knowing how to utilize leverage and acquire assets instead of just liabilities. Talk on that subject, on how so many people fall victim of just, pulling credit card out for this, that, or the other, but forget to use that for acquiring assets.
Yeah, there are 2 main departments at most every bank. One's the consumer side, which I'm not on. And the consumer side will be the ones that will give you a car loan or a boat loan for your RV, maybe for your second house, a HELOC for your house, your first mortgage. And that's where most people stop. They don't go past the consumer side of the bank. On the other side of the coin is the commercial side. And we generally lend money to people to purchase assets that generate income, enough income to actually make the loan payments for them so that they don't have to. In other words, think of your shopping center that you go shopping at. So we'll lend the money to the owner of that shopping center, who will then lease out those locations to a grocery store and various mom and pop retailers who pay him rent, who then pays us, the bank, and keeps the difference, which is the profit, which is passive income.
But that's the thing about leverage. Leverage, if used properly, you can win on the buy. You can, use somebody else's money to create wealth, but you want to do it wisely. You don't just want to go out and get money and not know what you're doing, because that can put you in a hole. And that's something you need to do your own research on. Now, for our audience, you do have a method. It's from middle class to millionaire. It's the 5-step process. If you can share that 5-step process and how they can benefit from it.
Yeah, so basically it's kind of the value chain that has to happen for a successful conclusion for a property that's going to generate passive income well into the future. And so I kind of break it down very simply into 5 quick steps. One is finding the property. It sounds very easy to find properties. In fact, when I started, we were in the middle of the crash in 2007 and 8, and even though there were foreclosures everywhere, it was still more difficult than you thought it should be, especially for a newbie entering the market. You weren't very well known in the community as far as being an investor, so they had a hard time believing you could, do what you say as far as cash purchases. So I always tell people when they start the process, it's like finding properties you think should be the simplest process, but typically it's one of the hardest. You got to kiss a lot of frogs to find one that'll actually work. And then secondly, after you find it, you've got to be able to fund it or finance it. And for most people, that doesn't just require cash only. It requires going to a bank like I did. I did not have a lot of cash just sitting in my account to purchase my first rental property. I actually had to get a unsecured line of credit from a banker friend of mine who's known me for several decades and essentially knew I wasn't going to abscond with the money. So there's financing. And then the third step is what your audience are experts or should be experts at. That's fixing up the property, because a lot of these properties, that especially the ones we're concentrating on, they need some work. I mean, they're not brand new properties. Otherwise, they would be sold retail like you would on a spec house. But these are houses that have been around for 20 or 30 years. But the beautiful thing about them is because the property has some age on it. It's been, you're looking at paying something relatively close to market value, less what the cost to repair it is, but you're not paying for brand new construction costs, as we all know are very expensive today. We are in the process, as I speak, of building a brand new starter home, one of the first ones we've done in a long time. I don't have the final tally yet, but without the land, right now, it appears that it's going to be about $225,000 to build a small 3-bedroom, 2-bath, what you consider a starter home. So you can buy, and then I just completed the purchase of an older house that was fully renovated for $144,000 for the same size. So you can get a substantial discount on what it would cost to buy something new versus fixing something up and being able to sell it or rent it in today's market. The next step is what I just said. After you fix it up, it's available for either rent or to sell it to somebody else. If you're selling it, it's typically like you were doing as a builder. You're building something for sale. And I do have a very well-established builder as a client who's had over 40 years experience in the building industry. And he said, I've always done 3 things with every property. And he is a spec house builder. The first is I would try to sell it retail. Obviously, that's your main job, is to get the most money and for it to be move-in ready for someone to buy it. If he couldn't sell it as retail, the second thing he would do is he would do a lease purchase option. So there are people out there that are self-employed that may not qualify for your traditional mortgages based on the underwriting criteria, but they do have good income and they do have good jobs and they do have some cash. So he would require them to put down a big chunk of money, and he would finance the balance for them, lease purchase option. And then the third option would be he would just keep it and rent it out. And he said, if everything just went perfectly, I would sell it first or lease option it. But if it didn't, I would keep it. And eventually those would be paid off. And he was able to accumulate 30 paid for properties that way over time. So I thought that was an excellent way for, a builder to look at. If this doesn't work, plan A is plan B, plan C. And he's never had to go to a plan D, thankfully.
Man, so many nuggets of wisdom right there, and so much we could talk on for just to move forward. Finding the property, ways to find properties include, if you see a little bandit sign, call that number and say, put me on your list. Or there's Facebook groups where wholesalers are hanging out, or you can go to local wholesaling meetups. Financing the deal, like you said, you have bankers like David, you have hard money lenders, you have personal people who can lend you money. One time I needed $280,000. I found a deal, I got it on paper, and I pounded the phone. God is my witness, for over 6 hours. And I said, hey, Ingram, I know we haven't talked since high school 10 years ago, but I have this deal. It's $280,000. I need 30 grand, so 310, and I'll give you 10% within 6 months. If you don't have that money, who do you know who does? And I got names and numbers of people that I haven't talked to in years. And then that person gave me a name, and that person gave me a name. And finally, I found a guy who flew down with cash money the following day to fund this deal. He was in some kind of farming business in California. That's all I'll say. And then fixing them up. As a contractor, you can fix them up for so much less than the normal, homeowner can, because you know how to work subs and know how to get pricing where you need it to be. and then flipping them or keeping them. And that's how you build wealth, guys. And we forgot to mention refinancing. What's a strategy right there? Explain how somebody can refinance that asset after it's been brought up to neighborhood value.
Well, I'll use the example of the very first house that I purchased, and this is back in 2007. We bought the house for $65,000. We put 15 into it, so it was $80,000 all in, and it appraised for 115. Now that was back in 2007. Fast forward to today, the house was rented to an individual. That individual stayed there for the last 14 and a half years. They never left. Wow. Which is not usual, I'll admit that, but it did happen for us in this case. We actually asked them to move so we can renovate the house a little bit, get it up to standards, because it's been 15 years of, hard living. And since it's paid for, we had the cash to renovate it again. And we were going to sell it until we figured out, hey, this is now in the floodplain, so now you got to have flood insurance. So why don't we just keep it? So we're renting it for $2,000 a month. It's paid for. But that same house in 2008 that appraised for 115 appraised for 325,000 today. If we hadn't borrowed the money to buy that house, we would not have lived to see the point where the house appreciated that much in value, plus getting $24,000 in cash flow.
That's amazing. And when you just said something, it hit a trigger, a floodplain. Because it was in a floodplain, you decided to keep it. I have a house in a floodplain, and it's the only house I've ever considered selling. But I'm curious why you're like, it's in a floodplain, let's keep it. What is your mindset on that?
So we actually have, when we bought it, it was not in the floodplain. And then there was a flood, a pretty bad one, and we knew the damage that was done because this is a crawl space house. And we fixed the damage very inexpensively. In fact, we built it up so even if it did flood again, it wouldn't affect this house, in this particular house. So we knew that we could cover what somebody in the flood insurance business considered a 100-year floodplain, and builders are the same thing. They know they can fix that thing up a lot cheaper than having to go pay an insurance adjuster, pay the premium, find the contractor to do the work. So essentially, it's like if you don't have a total loss, which I would keep flood insurance in that case, and if you have a bank loan, you will have to have flood insurance. It's a requirement. But once you pay it off, you can self-insure. And that's what we did. We chose to do it that way.
Nice. That's a whole nother topic right there. And self-insure, because the reasons why you would self-insure are, you could get it done for a lot less than the yearly annual premium cost. Is that a good interpretation of why you would self-insure versus going to a big nationwide or USA and paying their annual premiums?
Yeah, so I would just use it as, let's say your premium is $2,000 a year for the flood insurance, and we fixed up the house, the flood damage, for $5,000. Well, it takes you 2.5 years of no flood to replace the $5,000 insurance premiums that you didn't have to worry about collecting on because you didn't have a flood. So anything after 2.5 years is pure gravy, right? So in that instance, the math just works.
I love that. That's so true. Now, as far as what process do you have in place where you are regularly increasing your net worth? For a contractor who's listening, they're like, man, I want to get in the game. What process do you have as somebody who still has a W-2, but you're also, now increasing your net worth?
So it all comes down to scalability. And I think that's what really trips up a lot of people, both the W-2 people and the self-employed people. So they feel like, hey, I got to be able to do everything myself. And a lot of people can do everything themselves. I mean, when I say a lot, I mean a minority of people, like 10%, that have the ability to do all the construction, find the houses, get the financing on their own, do property management, the whole 9 yards. I was in the opposite end of that extreme. My extreme was this: what can I do? Because I can't or don't want to do any of those things, because I know that each one of those jobs are not easy jobs to begin with, number one. And number two, knowing my skill set, I had to figure out what value I brought to the equation. So for me to be able to scale it meant I couldn't do 100% of a house because I didn't want to do 100% of the work. So I used the who, not how approach. And the who, not how basically states, find team members that are as good or better than you in certain areas and have them do their part. You do what you're good at. And my part was being a banker, finding the money, because it's a very capital intensive business. But I have partners now that are like builders or contractors or full-time real estate investors. They do all the work part that I can't or won't do or don't have the time to do. And I bring all the money to the table so they don't have to worry about where am I going to get the money to buy something when I find it.
Man, I was about to say, what's the last book you've read cover to cover and the wisdom that you extrapolated from it? And you just dropped one of my favorite books, Who Not How. Who Not How is crucial. I'm trying to put together a big project out here in Costa Rica right now. There's so much opportunity and so much wealth to be made where we can buy hectares and develop nice home on each one little hectare and sell for $500,000. And I wrote it down. And I'm going to show each and every one of you guys right here. It says, I will build Costa Rica. And it says, build Costa Rica. Who are my who's? Find land. So I need the different realtors. Build homes. And then I've got Rolando and there's a few other builders out here. And then finance the deals, my GoBundance brothers, maybe even you. I got to figure out who's going to finance all these assets. And then my lawyer, named Rodolfo. And then I got to put together a pitch deck. And I haven't figured out who's going to do that yet, but I know I will. So what am I doing here? What can you summarize what I just did right here, David?
Yeah, you've basically found all the team members you need to have a successful project, and you're identifying people to fill those seats, getting the right people on the right seats of the bus.
Amen. Amen. What's another book that you've read and the lesson you can learn from it that applies to contractors growing their business?
You know, I think everyone talks about Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is a good book, but I really like Cash Flow Quadrant even better because it breaks down, to me as a banker, it breaks down, those 4 quadrants, which is essentially self-employed, which a contractor would be considered self-employed. So you got employees, self-employed, business owners, and investors. And for most people, they're on the left side of the quadrant. Employees like myself as a W-2, self-employed like a contractor running a contracting business. And where you make your wealth is on the right side of the quadrant. Business owner being somebody with a business they define as having over 500 employees, which I never wanted to have. But if you think about it, the wealthiest people in the world, like Elon Musk or Bill Gates, Microsoft and Tesla, they don't require Bill Gates and Elon to get up and do the work. They have employees doing all the work. So that's why they can travel and do other things. And then the investor, think about Warren Buffett, essentially invests in other projects, but also look at what I'm doing on the side with my W-2 job. So you don't have to just strictly stay in one quadrant. I've actually moved into more of my income is coming from the investor quadrant than the employee quadrant. And that's by design, because what I wanted to do was to replace my W-2 income so I didn't need it anymore. But once I successfully replaced my W-2 income, then it was like, what am I going to do with my time? So that's my next chore, is to figure out, if I left banking full time, what would I do with all my time? Because my banking job is almost to the point where it's a 4-hour work week. I've got it down. Sure. So it's hard to walk away from that. And then my investing side is less than a 4-hour work week. So I still have plenty of time to do other things.
That's impressive. You're getting your work done. Don't let the boss hear that, but still,
exactly. If he listens to it, it's like, well, I'm at 40.
Yeah. So man, that's incredible. David Vernich, the author of Middle Class to Millionaire. If you were to impart one more jewel of wisdom before sharing how people can reach out to you, and the question is, best tip or strategy or technique that you could give to an owner of a company who's leading a team and wants to leave a legacy or build a thriving culture?
Well, a lot of it is just having the focus on what you're wanting to achieve and how to get there. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, put off for the future things that they need to be doing today. So there's another quadrant. It's not the cash flow quadrant, but this quadrant was Stephen Covey in 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And he said the quadrant that most people spend most of the time is urgent, but not important. So things like your phone ringing, your emails, things like that are big time wasters. They're urgent, but they're typically not important things. Where you need to be spending your time and focused on is the not urgent, because it's not pressing time-wise. So if it's not urgent but important, what falls in that category? Well, the first thing that I think of, just because of the book I wrote, is people don't think, well, I need to be doing something today for my retirement in 40 years, especially when they're starting out young. And what I found is, in my own situation, you've got 4 quarters. I use a game metaphor. If you like football, it's 4 quarters. So from age 25 to 65 is 40 years, right? There's a typical plan everybody's on called the 40-40-40, which is work 40 hours a week for 40 years and then retire on 40% of your income with a Social Security check. That's essentially what most people's plans are. Instead, I say, okay, keep your day job, don't necessarily quit it. Keep your contracting job. In fact, the contracting job is probably better suited for this than a W-2 job in many ways, because you can where the value you add. But if you can start doing things like we had discussed in this call, by using those 4 or 5 steps and start building houses, not just for yourself, but doing renovations for things that you're going to keep, you will have passive income. So my original goal was, when I started in this, was to buy 1 house per year at age 45. So by age 45 to 65, I'd have 20 houses. And the first house at age 45, I would put a 20-year loan on. Well, guess what? It's paid off when I'm 65. Next house paid off when I'm 66. Next house paid off, you get the idea. And if I was generating $1,000 a month cash flow from each property after it's paid off, that's $120,000 of passive income, irregardless of if Social Security is there or not, plus whatever I still have in my 401k, because I didn't stop doing that either. This is not an either or thing. That's add this to it to give the probability of success that much higher. So that's my advice to everybody, whether they're W-2 or a contractor, is figure out a plan so that you can be where you want to be in 40 years versus having to deal with the aftermath of not having a plan, and you're dealt with one thing, a one-way trip down to living in a van down by the river like Chris Farley on Saturday Night Live.
Man, dig your well before you need it, contractors. What he's saying is absolutely true. Figure out a way, make a plan, and then get to it, because you can have everything you want, go everywhere you want to go, be the person you want to be, but you got to be willing to put forth the work, and you got to be willing to collect assets instead of always buying new liabilities. Man, with that being said, David Vernich, the author of Middle Class to Millionaire, if somebody wants to get your book or if somebody needs financing, how can they reach out to you?
So the best way is the old standby, which is LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm the only David Vernich. I'm in Nashville, so they can find me on LinkedIn. And for your audience members, if they want to buy the book, they can. It's on Amazon. But if you'd like a free copy, it'll be a PDF that I can email to you. I'll offer that to your audience. Just hit me up on LinkedIn. Heard about me on Justin's podcast, and I'll be glad to email you a free copy.
I love that. I want a free copy. David, you've done very well today, man. Thank you for being on the Real Construction Owners podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Justin.